Europe, a land of colossal empires and revolutionary ideas, where power shifted hands in epic battles, and revolutions changed the course of humanity. From the ashes of ancient civilizations to the chaos of world wars, Europe has been the stage for some of history's most defining moments. But how did it become what it is today? What makes this continent so unique? Was it the ambition of a Roman general, the vision of a Renaissance artist, or the defiance of a revolutionary? And how did these moments shape not just Europe, but the entire world? This is not just the story of kings and conquerors, it's the story of people, of struggles and triumphs, of innovation and destruction. It's a story of how one continent influenced the destiny of billions. And it's a story that is far from over. Join us as we uncover the events, the decisions, and the legacies that have made Europe a land of enduring influence and relentless change. 40,000 years ago, Europe wasn't the Europe we know today. It was a land of ice, wild animals, and a scattered population of Neanderthals. These early inhabitants were skilled at surviving harsh climates, crafting tools from stone, and hunting large prey. They thrived here for hundreds of thousands of years. But then, something happened. A new species arrived, Homo sapiens. These newcomers brought advanced tools, complex language, and a drive to explore. What followed was a meeting of two human species. Did they trade knowledge? Compete for resources? Or was their coexistence much shorter than we think? Within a few thousand years, the Neanderthals disappeared, leaving Homo sapiens as the dominant species. With the Ice Age receding, Europe began to transform. The thick ice sheets that once covered the land melted, revealing fertile valleys and open plains. Humans adapted, moving away from hunting and gathering towards something entirely new. In the Fertile Crescent, what we now call the Middle East, people discovered they could plant seeds, grow crops, and tame animals. Agriculture changed everything. It meant people could settle, build homes, and form communities. Over time, this knowledge spread into Europe, carried by migration and trade. But what made farming so revolutionary wasn't just food, it was time. For the first time, people had the chance to think beyond survival. They began creating tools, structures, and even early forms of art. But how did this spark the rise of Europe's first civilizations? By 300 BCE, on the island of Crete, a remarkable society began to emerge. The Minoans built sprawling palaces filled with vibrant artwork and intricate designs. They were traders, connecting their island to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Their ships dominated the seas, their culture flourished, and for centuries, Crete was the heart of Mediterranean power. But then, they vanished. Was it the eruption of the volcano on nearby Thera, one of the most violent natural disasters in human history? Or was it something more human, an invasion or internal collapse? The Minoans left no clear answers, only ruins. Not long after, another power rose. This time, on the mainland of Greece. The Mycenaeans were warriors, known for their fortified cities and their role in the Trojan War, a conflict immortalized in Homer's Iliad. They were the builders of Europe's early myths, the ancestors of Greek heroes and gods. Their society was structured, their influence widespread. But, like the Minoans, their dominance didn't last. Around 1200 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization crumbled. Why? Historians debate whether it was foreign invaders, a series of natural disasters, or economic collapse. Whatever the cause, their fall left Europe in chaos, setting the stage for a new age. This was Europe's beginning, a continent shaped by migration, survival, and the rise and fall of civilizations. But the seeds planted by the Neanderthals, the farmers, the Minoans, and the Mycenaeans didn't disappear. They would grow into something much larger, something that would define the world. The question now is, how did these early steps lead to the empires, revolutions, and innovations that would follow? To answer that, we'll need to look deeper into the heart of Europe's story. By the first millennium BCE, Europe began to transform. Small settlements grew into city-states, each with its own identity and ambitions. Among them, Athens rose to prominence, becoming the birthplace of democracy. Here, ordinary citizens debated laws and shaped their government, a revolutionary idea in a world ruled by kings and tyrants. But democracy didn't mean unity. Athens' cultural brilliance was matched only by its rival, Sparta, a militaristic powerhouse that valued strength and discipline above all else. Their rivalry would ignite the Peloponnesian War, a brutal conflict that weakened both powers. Athens fell, its golden age shattered, and Greece descended into chaos. But chaos often breeds opportunity. In the north, a young Macedonian king named Alexander inherited a fragile kingdom. Within a decade, he united the Greek city-states and set his sights far beyond Europe. Alexander the Great's conquests stretched from Egypt to India, creating one of history's largest empires. But his ambitions came at a cost. By the time he died at just 32, his empire began to fracture, leaving behind a legacy of cultural exchange and the spread of Greek ideas. These ideas, philosophy, art, and science, would form the bedrock of European civilization. Yet, the vacuum left by Alexander's empire was quickly filled by another power rising to the west. Rome. What began as a small city on the banks of the Tiber River grew into an empire that controlled nearly all of Europe. How did Rome achieve such dominance? Its secret lay in adaptability. Rome's armies were unmatched, its roads connected vast territories, and its laws brought order to conquered lands. By 117 CE, under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire stretched from Britain to the Middle East, influencing cultures across 3 continents. Yet, Rome wasn't just a military machine, it was a melting pot of ideas, religions, and traditions. Roman engineering built aqueducts and amphitheaters that still stand today. Its governance introduced the concept of citizenship, uniting diverse peoples under one system. But as Rome expanded, so did its challenges. By the 1st century BCE, the Republic was crumbling. Corruption and power struggles dominated its politics, and at the center of it all stood Julius Caesar. A brilliant general, Caesar's ambition brought him both glory and enemies. In 44 BCE, as he stood in the Senate, he was stabbed 23 times by those who feared his growing power. His assassination marked the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire under Augustus. Yet, even as Rome reached new heights, its stability was always fragile. In the 1st century CE, another event reshaped the Roman world, the birth of Christianity. A religion born in the provinces, it began as a small movement among the poor and persecuted. But by the 4th century, it became the official religion of the empire, uniting Rome under a new spiritual identity. This shift would have profound effects not just on Rome, but on the entire future of Europe. Yet, Rome's power couldn't last forever. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire fell. Overexpansion, economic turmoil, and invasions by barbarian tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals brought centuries of dominance to an end. The empire that once united Europe lay in ruins. But its ideas, its culture, and its influence would survive, shaping the medieval kingdoms that rose in its place. This was Europe in the Age of Empires, a time of innovation, conquest, and collapse. From the philosophical brilliance of Athens to the engineering marvels of Rome, these centuries defined what Europe could achieve. But with the fall of Rome, a question loomed: could Europe ever reclaim its former glory? Or would it be lost in the chaos of the Middle Ages? The answers would unfold in the centuries to come. When the Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, Europe entered a period historians often call the Dark Ages. Cities emptied, trade routes collapsed, and knowledge that had once been safeguarded by Roman scholars seemed to vanish. For centuries, Europe was a patchwork of warring tribes and scattered kingdoms. It was a time of survival, where power was measured not by innovation, but by land and force. Yet, even in the darkness, seeds of transformation were being planted. As the Roman Empire crumbled, one institution remained: the Catholic Church. It became the single unifying force in a fragmented continent, offering hope, stability, and structure. Monasteries preserved ancient knowledge, copying manuscripts by hand, while missionaries spread Christianity to pagan lands. By the 8th century, nearly all of Europe had adopted the faith. But the Church's influence extended far beyond religion. It shaped politics, culture, and even warfare. It crowned kings, brokered alliances, and defined the moral framework of medieval life. But what happens when spiritual power collides with earthly ambition? By the 9th century, one man sought to bring order to this chaos: Charlemagne. Crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, he envisioned a united Christian Europe. Under his rule, education flourished, and the arts began to revive. He built an empire spanning modern France, Germany, and Italy, but even his vision was fragile. After his death, his empire splintered, leaving Europe once again vulnerable to chaos. Chaos that came from the north. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking longships appeared on Europe's shores, their sails striking terror into villages and monasteries alike. These Norse raiders weren't just invaders, they were settlers and traders, shaping the regions they touched. Normandy, for instance, owes its name to the Northmen who settled there. But why did the Vikings target Europe? And how did their raids transform the kingdoms they terrorized? As the Viking threat waned, new powers emerged. In 1066, the Norman conquest reshaped the political landscape of Europe. William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel, defeating Harold II at the Battle of Hastings and becoming King of England. This event wasn't just a shift in power, it fused Norman and Anglo-Saxon cultures, laying the foundation for the England we recognize today. Through invasions, conquests, and the unifying force of faith, Europe slowly began to rebuild itself. Feudalism became the dominant system, tying peasants, knights, and lords into a rigid hierarchy of loyalty and service. Castles rose across the countryside, a symbol of both protection and power. Yet, life was harsh for most, and survival often depended on the whims of nature and the will of their rulers. The medieval world was one of contrasts. It was a time of war, yet also of faith. A time of division, yet one where Christianity unified millions. And as Europe transitioned from the chaos of the Dark Ages to the structure of feudal society, it was laying the groundwork for something greater. But how did this fragile order withstand the challenges of the Crusades, the Black Death, and the rise of powerful kingdoms? The answers lie in the next chapter of Europe's story. By the 14th century, Europe was beginning to stir from centuries of darkness. After generations of feudal life and religious dominance, something extraordinary was happening. Cities were growing, trade was flourishing, and ideas were spreading. In Italy, the heart of the old Roman Empire, scholars and artists looked back to the ancient world for inspiration. What they found would ignite a revolution of thought, creativity, and innovation. This was the Renaissance, a rebirth that would change Europe forever. It began in Florence, a city that became a hub for the most brilliant minds of the age. Leonardo da Vinci was more than just a painter, he was an inventor, a scientist, and a man driven by insatiable curiosity. His sketches reveal flying machines, anatomical studies, and designs far ahead of his time. Then there was Michelangelo, whose sculpture of David and the Sistine Chapel ceiling are among humanity's greatest artistic achievements. These weren't just works of beauty, they symbolized a new way of thinking about humanity's potential, a celebration of individual talent and human effort. But the Renaissance wasn't confined to art. In science, figures like Galileo Galilei began challenging long-held beliefs about the universe. Armed with a telescope he designed himself, Galileo looked at the stars and declared that Earth wasn't the center of the cosmos. It was a bold claim, one that brought him into direct conflict with the Catholic Church. Yet, his discoveries laid the foundation for modern science, pushing Europe into a new age of reason. As ideas spread, so did the means to share them. In 1440, Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press revolutionized communication. For the first time, books and knowledge were no longer the exclusive property of the elite. But the printing press would also become the Church's greatest challenge, for it gave one man the power to spark a religious revolution. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed 95 theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. His challenge was simple but profound: the Catholic Church had strayed from its purpose, corrupted by wealth and indulgences. Luther's words spread like wildfire: thanks to the printing press, igniting what we now call the Protestant Reformation. Suddenly, Europe was divided, not just geographically, but spiritually. Catholic and Protestant states began to form, each defending their faith with passion and, often, violence. The impact of the Reformation rippled across Europe. Entire nations, like England under Henry VIII, broke away from the Catholic Church. Wars erupted, alliances shifted, and the map of Europe was redrawn. But it wasn't just religion that was changing. The Reformation, paired with the Renaissance, reshaped the way Europeans thought about power, identity, and freedom. By the end of the 16th century, Europe was a continent transformed. The Renaissance had shown the world what humanity could achieve through creativity and knowledge. The Reformation had challenged the authority of the Church, proving that no institution was untouchable. Together, these movements set the stage for the modern world, where art, science, and faith would forever be in conversation, and sometimes, in conflict. But with all this progress came turmoil. How would Europe's new ideas about freedom, individuality, and reason fare in the centuries of conflict and revolution to come? That question would define the next chapter of Europe's story. By the 15th century, Europe's gaze turned outward. The continent was recovering from centuries of conflict and transformation, but now, a new ambition took hold: exploration. Kingdoms sought not just to defend their borders but to expand them across oceans, to lands unknown. The age of exploration had begun, and its effects would ripple across the globe for centuries. It started with Portugal, a small nation with big ambitions. Under Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese explorers charted the African coastline, searching for a sea route to the riches of Asia. In 1498, Vasco da Gama achieved what seemed impossible, reaching India by sailing around the southern tip of Africa. The doors to global trade were thrown open, and soon, others would follow. Spain quickly became Portugal's rival. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag, made landfall in the Americas. He believed he had found a new route to Asia, but what he truly discovered was an entirely new world. Spain wasted no time. Conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro brought the might of their empire to the Americas, toppling powerful civilizations like the Aztecs and the Incas. Gold and silver poured into Spanish coffers, fueling its dominance as the first global empire. But Spain and Portugal weren't alone for long. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Britain and France joined the race. The British Empire established colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and eventually India, driven by trade and the promise of new markets. France, too, carved out territories in Canada and parts of Africa, leaving a lasting imprint on these regions. These nations weren't just competing for land, they were competing for power, wealth, and influence on an unprecedented scale. Yet, the consequences of exploration went far beyond new borders. The Columbian Exchange, a term historians use to describe the transfer of goods, animals, plants, and diseases between the Old and New Worlds, transformed the planet. Europe gained crops like potatoes, tomatoes, and maize, which revolutionized diets and agriculture. In return, European livestock and technologies reshaped life in the Americas. But there was a darker side. Diseases like smallpox, carried unknowingly by European explorers, devastated indigenous populations. The human cost of this exchange is immeasurable. The age of exploration wasn't just about wealth and power, it was about redefining the world. The maps of Europe were redrawn, reflecting its expanding reach. But this era also planted the seeds of colonialism, exploitation, and centuries of inequality. For the first time, Europe's influence extended far beyond its borders, but at what cost? As the great empires grew, so did their rivalries. How would these ambitions for global dominance shape the conflicts to come? And how would the wealth of the New World transform the political landscape of Europe itself? The answers lie in the age of revolutions and industrial empires, where the stakes would grow even higher. By the 18th century, Europe stood at a crossroads. The old ways, monarchies, feudal hierarchies, and unquestioned religious authority were being challenged. A new wave of ideas was sweeping across the continent, one that placed reason, science, and the rights of the individual at its core. This was the Enlightenment, a movement that would forever reshape how humanity understood itself and the world. At the heart of the Enlightenment were thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke. Voltaire, with his sharp wit and fearless critique of authority, demanded freedom of speech and religious tolerance. Rousseau argued for the idea of a social contract, where governments derived their power from the consent of the governed. And Locke championed the concept of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, ideas that would inspire revolutions on both sides of the Atlantic. But these ideas weren't just theoretical. They were dynamite, placed under the foundations of Europe's ancient regimes. Nowhere did these ideas explode more dramatically than in France. In 1789, after years of economic hardship and a growing sense of inequality, the French Revolution erupted. The people of France, inspired by Enlightenment ideals, overthrew their monarchy, demanding liberty, equality, and fraternity. The streets of Paris became a battleground, as the old order collapsed and a new vision for society was born. But revolutions are rarely smooth. The French Revolution descended into chaos, with the Reign of Terror claiming thousands of lives, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. Out of the turmoil rose a new leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. He would take the revolution's ideals and spread them across Europe, reshaping its political landscape. Yet even as political revolutions shook Europe, another revolution, quieter but no less transformative, was underway. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, fueled by the invention of machines that could do the work of dozens of hands. Factories sprang up, cities expanded, and railroads crisscrossed the countryside. This wasn't just a technological shift, it was a social and economic one. Millions left rural villages for urban centers, seeking work and opportunity. But with progress came challenges: overcrowded slums, harsh working conditions, and a growing divide between the wealthy and the working class. The Industrial Revolution didn't stop at machines. It changed how people thought about the future. Science and innovation took center stage, as Europe became the global powerhouse of production and invention. But this rapid progress came with a cost. The environment suffered, traditional ways of life disappeared, and economic systems became more unequal. How would Europe reconcile the promises of progress with the realities of its impact? The Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution weren't isolated events, they were interconnected forces that transformed Europe's foundations. They questioned authority, redefined human rights, and brought about changes that would ripple across the globe. But these changes also set the stage for new conflicts. As Europe entered the 19th century, how would it balance the ideals of freedom and equality with the challenges of modernization? And how would these revolutions shape the empires and wars that lay ahead? This was Europe at a turning point, a continent reshaping itself, questioning its past, and hurtling toward an uncertain future. By the dawn of the 19th century, Europe was a continent in flux. The ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, had shaken the foundations of monarchies across the continent. But one man took those ideals and wielded them as a weapon: Napoleon Bonaparte. A brilliant strategist and ambitious leader, Napoleon rose from the chaos of revolution to crown himself Emperor of France. But he didn't stop there. Napoleon's armies swept across Europe, redrawing borders and dismantling old regimes. Kingdoms fell, alliances shifted, and for a moment, it seemed he was unstoppable. Yet, his ambition proved to be his undoing. In 1812, Napoleon's invasion of Russia ended in disaster, with his army decimated by the harsh winter and fierce resistance. By 1815, his defeat at the Battle of Waterloo marked the end of his reign. But the impact of the Napoleonic Wars lingered. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 attempted to restore balance, redrawing Europe's borders and creating fragile peace. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions simmered, waiting to erupt. And erupt they did in 1914. A single event, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, set off a chain reaction that plunged Europe into World War I. The Great War, as it was called, engulfed empires in a brutal conflict that lasted 4 years. Trench warfare, gas attacks, and devastating battles like Verdun and the Somme left millions dead and entire regions in ruin. When the war ended in 1918, Europe was unrecognizable. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires had collapsed, and the Treaty of Versailles reshaped borders and imposed harsh penalties on Germany. But the treaty's terms planted the seeds for an even greater conflict. Barely 2 decades later, Europe found itself at war again. World War II was a war of ideology, conquest, and survival. Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany unleashed a wave of aggression as Nazi forces swept through Europe. The Holocaust claimed the lives of 6 million Jews, while battles like Stalingrad and Normandy turned the tide of the war. By 1945, the Axis powers were defeated, but at an unimaginable cost. Cities lay in rubble, economies were shattered, and over 70 million lives had been lost. Yet, from this devastation came a new vision for Europe. Leaders realized that old rivalries and divisions could no longer define the continent. In 1949, NATO was formed, and by the 1950s, the European Coal and Steel Community, a precursor to the European Union, was created. The goal was clear: to ensure that Europe would never again be torn apart by war. These wars didn't just reshape borders, they reshaped the very identity of Europe. They forced the continent to confront its darkest moments and find a path forward. But how would Europe balance its history of conflict with its aspirations for peace? And could the scars of the 20th century ever truly heal? As Europe moved into the modern era, its story became one of rebuilding, resilience, and redefining its place in the world. But the lessons of these wars still echo today, shaping the politics, alliances, and challenges that continue to define the continent. By 1945, Europe was a continent in ruins. 2 world wars had left cities destroyed, economies shattered, and millions dead. But amidst the devastation, a new vision began to emerge. Leaders from across the continent realized that Europe's cycle of conflict could not continue. The only way forward was through cooperation. This was the beginning of a bold experiment, one that would redefine the meaning of unity. In the years following World War II, democracy began to take root in places where dictatorships once thrived. Germany, divided into East and West, rebuilt itself under vastly different systems, while nations like Italy, France, and the United Kingdom focused on rebuilding their economies and ensuring that the horrors of war would not return. The Marshall Plan, an initiative led by the United States, poured billions into European recovery, helping nations rebuild infrastructure and stabilize their economies. But this was just the beginning. In 1951, 6 nations, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, came together to form the European Coal and Steel Community. The idea was simple yet revolutionary. By pooling resources critical to war, like coal and steel, they could make conflict between them not just unlikely but impossible. It was the first step toward what we now know as the European Union. Over the decades, the European Union expanded, both in size and ambition. From its beginnings as an economic partnership, it grew into a political and cultural union, with member states agreeing to shared values of democracy, human rights, and free trade. The introduction of the euro in 1999 created a single currency for much of the continent, making Europe more interconnected than ever before. But as the EU grew, so did its challenges. Europe is a continent of incredible diversity, with dozens of languages, cultures, and histories. Balancing this diversity has not always been easy. Debates over national sovereignty, immigration, and economic inequality have tested the limits of unity. The 2008 financial crisis exposed deep divides between richer and poorer member states, while the United Kingdom's decision to leave the EU in 2016, known as Brexit, was a stark reminder that not everyone shared the same vision for Europe's future. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, the EU has endured. Today, Europe is at a crossroads. It faces global challenges like climate change, technological transformation, and the rise of authoritarianism at its borders. But it also stands as a symbol of what cooperation can achieve. the EU has become a model for peace, showing that even a continent with a history as bloody as Europe's can come together to build something stronger. The story of the European Union is far from over. How will it navigate its internal divisions and external pressures? Can it remain a beacon of democracy and unity in an increasingly fractured world? These are questions that will define the next chapter of Europe's story. For now, Europe's journey, from the ashes of war to the creation of a union spanning 27 nations, remains one of the most extraordinary transformations in history. It is a testament to the power of unity, even in the face of incredible diversity and persistent challenges. Europe's story is one of extraordinary resilience. From the Neanderthals braving the Ice Age to the rise and fall of empires, from revolutions that redefined freedom to the rebuilding of a continent scarred by war, Europe has been a land of constant transformation. Its history is not just a tale of conquest and conflict but also one of cultural richness, where ideas, art, and innovation have flourished despite immense challenges. This is a continent that gave the world democracy, sparked the Renaissance, and set the foundations of modern science and philosophy. It has endured dark periods of division and war but has emerged time and again, determined to rebuild and redefine itself. Even today, Europe's story continues to evolve, balancing its rich diversity with a shared vision of unity and progress. But history is far more than a collection of dates and events. It's the story of humanity itself, filled with lessons, triumphs, and warnings for the future. If you've enjoyed this journey through Europe's past and want to explore more incredible stories of resilience, transformation, and culture, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll uncover the events and people that have shaped our world, one story at a time.